The courtroom was almost empty, save for the echo of hurried footsteps and the low murmur of clerks packing up for the day. In the center aisle stood Jasmine Carter, a young black woman whose crisp blue uniform reflected both pride and years of sacrifice. She had just finished testifying in a high-profile case, her words strong, her evidence airtight. To Jasmine, the uniform was more than fabric. It was a badge of honor, a promise to uphold justice without fear or favor. But outside the courthouse doors, justice was about to be twisted against her as Jasmine pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the cool afternoon air. Two police officers leaned against their cruiser, watching her intently. Their posture was casual, but their eyes carried something sharper: suspicion, hostility. They straightened as she approached. "You, Carter?" one asked, spitting her name like it was an insult. "Yes," Jasmine replied, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. Her tone was polite but firm, the same tone she had used countless times in her line of duty. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Jasmine blinked, startled. "Excuse me, you heard me," the second officer barked. "You're under arrest." Confusion surged through her. Under arrest? For what? Neither man answered. Instead, one yanked her arms roughly behind her, the metal of the handcuffs biting into her wrists. People on the courthouse steps stopped and stared, whispers buzzing like hornets. Jasmine felt heat rise in her chest, not just from the humiliation, but from the realization of what was happening. This was not a lawful arrest. This was something else. Her heart pounded as they shoved her toward the squad car. She wanted to fight back, to demand answers, but the cold grip of steel around her wrists reminded her of the trap she was in. She caught sight of her reflection in the cruiser's window, her uniform crumpled, her dignity bruised. The irony burned. The same uniform that symbolized justice was now being mocked by those sworn to uphold it. Inside the back seat, Jasmine's mind raced. She was no stranger to prejudice, no stranger to the quiet sneers or whispered slurs, but this was bold, reckless, and cruel, and it was happening in front of the courthouse, the very place meant to be the heart of fairness. The officers smirked as if they had already won. They assumed she was powerless, just another target they could intimidate, another life they could trample without consequence. But what they did not know was that Jasmine Carter was not a woman easily broken. And though they had taken her freedom, they had overlooked one crucial right. Her phone call, as they dragged her into the precinct, still jeered at by colleagues who turned a blind eye. Jasmine made a silent vow. Her one call would not be wasted. She knew exactly who to dial. And when the voice on the other end answered, it would shatter the office's arrogance and their lives forever. What began as an act of racism, an abuse of power, was about to unravel into a reckoning that neither of them could escape. The courthouse smelled of polished wood, paper, and stale coffee, a familiar scent that usually brought Jasmine Carter a strange sense of calm. Today, however, the calm had been shattered. She had spent the morning testifying in a high-profile case, her words precise, her evidence meticulous. Every movement, every answer had been delivered with the discipline and confidence instilled in her by years in law enforcement. The uniform she wore was crisp, a symbol of the oath she had sworn and the justice she had pledged to uphold. As she walked down the center aisle toward the courthouse exit, Her polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, echoing in the nearly empty hall. She was thinking of the victory, small but significant, that she had secured that morning. The conviction she had helped ensure. Justice, she reminded herself, did not always arrive quickly, but it arrived eventually. Yet, outside, beneath the overhang of the courthouse steps, the world had other plans. 2 police officers leaned casually against their cruiser, arms crossed, their gaze following her as she approached. Jasmine noticed the subtle hardening of their eyes, the curl of derision at the corners of their mouths. It was the same look she had encountered before, dismissive, arrogant, tinged with something darker, but she had never expected it here, at her moment of professional pride. "You, Carter," one of them called, his voice sharp and accusing. Jasmine's brow furrowed. "Yes," she said cautiously, her hand brushing the strap of her bag. Her voice, usually confident, carried an edge of suspicion now. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." She froze. I don't understand." "For what?" The officers exchanged a glance, one smirking, the other silent, but the command was final. Before she could respond, her arms were grabbed roughly and pulled behind her. The metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, cold and unyielding. Her body jolted forward, instinctively resisting, but she was outnumbered. People on the courthouse steps stopped and stared. Some whispered. Others stared openly, confusion and judgment painting their faces. Jasmine felt the sting of humiliation, a sense of injustice. So raw, it seemed almost physical. Her uniform, the symbol of her integrity, was now crumpled and compromised. Her badge, once a shield of honor, now mocked her. "What's the charge?" she demanded, her voice rising despite the shock. Silence. The officers did not answer. They were confident in their power, certain that her dignity could be stripped simply by the weight of their authority. Jasmine's heart pounded, a mixture of fear and fury. She had encountered prejudice before on the streets, in minor confrontations, even within law enforcement, but never so blatant, never so brazen, and never while she stood in her full professional capacity. As they pushed her toward the cruiser, Jasmine's mind raced. Her training told her to stay calm, to think strategically, to gather information for defense. But her instincts screamed at her that this was not standard procedure. This was personal. This was discriminatory. And it was deliberate. Inside the squad car, the officers continued their taunts, small jabs disguised as jokes. Every word chipped away at her composure. But Jasmine refused to let them see her break. She focused instead on what she could control: her. One phone call, her right to legal counsel, and the knowledge that the truth was on her side. The city blurred past the window as she sat in the back seat, cuffs biting into her skin, uniform wrinkled, face flushed with indignation. The officers believed she was powerless. They believed that fear would silence her. But Jasmine Carter had survived prejudice and injustice her entire life, and she had never backed down. One thought anchored her. The moment she made her call, the tables would turn. Their arrogance, their abuse of power would meet accountability. And when that moment came, they would realize the full measure of the woman they had underestimated. This was not just an arrest. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed overhead, cold and unforgiving. Jasmine Carter sat in the back of the holding room, the handcuffs still tight around her wrists, her uniform rumpled, but her posture unwavering. The officers had tossed her into the chair like she was nothing, smirking at every sharp word she dared to speak. "You sure you're tough enough for this?" Cart once sneered, leaning over her. "Thought uniforms were for people who play by the rules. Guess some people need lessons." Jasmine met his gaze steadily. "I'm only tough enough to follow the law, and I suggest you start remembering it." The words barely registered to him. He laughed, shrugging as if her protests were irrelevant. But Jasmine's mind was working fast. She had known this moment might come not, because she anticipated every move of these men, but because she had lived long enough to understand that the system sometimes rewarded arrogance and punished integrity. Her moment of power, however, was just a phone call away. "Can I make a phone call?" she asked calmly, her tone measured but unyielding. The officers exchanged a glance, a flicker of doubt passing between them. "Sure," the second one muttered, clearly annoyed. "Make it quick." Jasmine lifted the phone with a steady hand, her fingers brushing the cool plastic. She dialed a number she knew by heart. Only person who could turn the tide, her uncle, a federal judge who had spent decades fighting corruption in law enforcement. "Uncle Marcus," she said once he answered, her voice low but urgent. "I need your help. I've been arrested unjustly." Two officers at the courthouse. Within moments, the tone on the other end changed. There was no hesitation, no confusion, only swift authority. "Stay calm, Jasmine. I know exactly who you're talking about. I'll call immediately. Keep your composure. Do not let them provoke you." Jasmine's breathing slowed slightly, but her eyes did not leave the officers. They were smirking still, completely unaware of the storm she had unleashed with a simple call. "Carter," one stammered after a moment, sensing something off. "What?" Before he could finish, a voice boomed over the precinct radio. It was firm, unmistakable. Autorite Chief of Police himself. "Precinct 12. Hold all actions. Officer inquiry initiated immediately. You are instructed to release detainee until investigation. Internal Affairs is on the way." The officers froze, their smirks vanishing like smoke. Their confidence faltered, replaced with confusion and fear. The same woman they had assumed powerless was now protected by the full force of the system, and not by luck, but by her courage, her foresight, and the single phone call they had overlooked. Jasmine leaned back in the chair, a quiet smile forming. She remained calm, hands cuffed, but her eyes glimmered with controlled triumph. The room seemed smaller now, their arrogance suffocating, their every move scrutinized and exposed. Minutes later, Internal Affairs officers arrived, badges gleaming. Papers in, and they moved with purpose, scanning reports, questioning witnesses, and collecting the evidence that would soon unravel the facade the two officers had relied on. The arrogant officers tried to protest, but every document they produced, every word they spoke, only served to deepen the case against them. Falsified reports, inconsistent statements, and a trail of discriminatory behavior, all meticulously documented, were now in the hands of people who had both authority and willingness to act. Jasmine's uniform was wrinkled, her hands sore, but her dignity was intact. The officers had underestimated one thing: her intelligence, her calm under pressure, and the power of the right call at the right time. And with that single act, the first cracks began to appear in the walls of arrogance and prejudice that had once seemed impenetrable. By the time she was released from the holding room, the precinct had shifted. Whispered conversations among other officers, quick looks exchanged, everyone knew something monumental had just happened. Jasmine walked out of the room with her head high, her uniform smoothed, and her heart steady. Her one call had not just preserved her freedom, it had set the stage for justice, a reckoning that would not be ignored. The precinct had never felt so quiet. The laughter, the smirks, the casual arrogance of the officers had vanished, replaced by the tense shuffle of paperwork, low murmurs, and nervous glances. Jasmine Carter had walked out of that holding room hours earlier, but her presence lingered like a shadow, proof that power and prejudice could be challenged and justice could not be ignored. By the afternoon, Internal Affairs had begun their investigation. Every action of the two officers was scrutinized under the harsh glare of accountability. Reports were compared, witnesses interviewed, and surveillance footage examined. Each piece of evidence added to the growing weight against them. Falsified reports, discriminatory remarks, and reckless abuse of power. The officers tried to maintain composure, but cracks began to show almost immediately. One stumbled over his words when questioned about timeline. Another's false statements were quickly contradicted by multiple witnesses. The arrogance that had carried them through years of unchecked authority crumbled as the magnitude of their misdeeds became undeniable. Meanwhile, Jasmine's reputation remained untarnished. Her professionalism, her courage under duress, and the decisiveness of her single phone call had not only preserved her dignity, but had also highlighted the officer's misconduct. She did not gloat. She did not celebrate. She simply prepared for the next step, the courtroom, where truth would be revealed to all. The day of the trial arrived. The same courthouse steps where Jasmine had been publicly humiliated were now filled with anticipation. Reporters lining the halls, cameras flashing, and whispers spreading among spectators. Inside the courtroom, the officers sat uneasily. Their confidence eroded. They had faced difficult inquiries before, but never one where their own actions, captured in indisputable evidence, had been laid bare with such clarity. Jasmine entered the courtroom in her uniform, calm and composed. Every eye followed her, but she walked with purpose, not pride, her strength emanating quietly, a silent declaration that she had survived, and that justice was finally within reach. As the trial proceeded, Internal Affairs, investigators, and witnesses presented a compelling case. Every fabricated report, every disparaging remark, every act of prejudice was documented and highlighted. The officers' arrogance, once their armor, became their undoing. At one point, the lead investigator paused, looking directly at the officers. "This is not merely a case of misunderstanding or procedural error," she said. "This is a pattern of misconduct and abuse of authority, and it will not be tolerated." The courtroom was silent, the weight of truth pressing down on the men who had once believed themselves untouchable. Their defenses faltered, their arguments weak and unconvincing. The very law they had sworn to uphold now stood against them. When the judge read the verdict, the officers were found guilty of abuse of power, falsifying reports, and racially motivated misconduct. They were stripped of their badges, their careers destroyed, and their reputations in ruins. For the first time, they felt the consequences of their choices, not behind the safety of assumed authority, but in full public reckoning. Jasmine watched quietly from the side, her emotions a mixture of relief and quiet triumph. She did not dance in victory. She knew this was more than personal justice. It was a statement, a reminder that the law protects everyone, even those who have been doubted, dismissed, or underestimated. Her colleagues, initially hesitant or silent during her arrest, now nodded in respect. Some offered apologies, others admiration. She had not sought recognition, but it came anyway, earned through courage and integrity. Walking out of the courthouse, Jasmine reflected on the path that had brought her here. One phone call had changed everything. One act of resolve had exposed the arrogance and prejudice of two men who had underestimated her, and one woman in uniform had reminded the world that honor, dignity, and justice are not privileged. They are rights that demand defense. The officer's downfall was complete, but more importantly, Jasmine's strength had left a lasting impression. Courage can be quiet, but it can also shatter the foundations of injustice. And as she walked into the sunlight, the weight of the past lifted. She knew this story was far bigger than her. It was a testament to the power of standing firm, of refusing to be silenced, and of letting truth prevail over prejudice. One act of courage can ignite justice. One call, one decision, one stand can dismantle arrogance, racism, and abuse of power, proving that integrity and resolve can change lives and even entire institutions.